$10 is all that stands between you and one of the hottest, most miserable nights of your life. I walked past this exact bucket at a hardware store in Lancaster County last summer and had no idea it held a secret that the cooling industry has been quietly hoping you'd never figure out. The Amish have been using a version of this trick for almost 300 years. And the moment I learned what was inside that plain white 5-gallon bucket, I understood why nobody on television has ever shown it to you. Let me back up. It was July, the kind of July where the air feels like wet cotton stuffed into your lungs. I was driving through Intercourse, Pennsylvania, in a van I'd been sleeping in for 6 weeks. The AC in the van had died somewhere outside of Harrisburg, and I was down to a wet bandana and bad decisions. My phone said 97 degrees. My dashboard said 104. My shirt said, "Please, sir, ring me out." I pulled off Route 340 near a small farm stand because I saw a hand-painted sign that just said, "Cold drinks, cash." An older man was sitting on a wooden bench under a black umbrella. He wasn't sweating, not one drop. He had a long gray beard, a straw hat, and he was calmly whittling a piece of pine like the heat didn't exist. His name, he told me later, was Reuben Stoltzfus. I asked him how he wasn't melting. He looked at me, smiled a little, and said 4 words. "Come around the back." Behind the stand, under a small overhang made of scrap tin, sat a plain white 5-gallon bucket. A little battery fan was taped to the top with what looked like an old inner tube. A short piece of white PVC pipe stuck out the side. And I swear to you, standing 3 feet from that bucket, the air felt 10 degrees cooler. I asked him what it was. He said, "Icebox." I asked how much it cost. $10, maybe 12. I asked how long the Amish had been doing this. He said, "Long time, before wires." Then he pointed at the bucket, at the fan, at the piece of PVC, and at a block of ice wrapped in cloth sitting inside. He said, "Same idea, just simpler." That was the moment everything changed for me, because I had spent, and I am ashamed to admit this out loud, almost $400 that same summer trying to cool a space smaller than a walk-in closet. I had a portable AC, an inverter, a second battery, a solar panel that never quite kept up, and a fan that sounded like a small helicopter. Reuben's setup cost less than the gas I burned driving to his farm stand. And it worked better in the spot where it mattered, right in front of my face. Here's what almost nobody tells you about home cooling in America. In 1902, Willis Carrier invented the modern electric air conditioner. Good for him. But what most people don't know is that at the exact same time, there was an entire competing industry called the evaporative cooler industry. And it was cheap, off-grid, and had been quietly used in American farmhouses, southern porches, and Pennsylvania Dutch country since at least the 1740s. These devices were sometimes called swamp coolers, sometimes ice chests with a draft, and in some old catalogs, parlor breeze boxes. In 1938, the Federal Trade Commission held a series of hearings that most people have never heard of, referred to in internal documents as the Comfort Cooling Standards Review. The hearings were pushed heavily by the National Electrical Manufacturers Association, which had a very direct interest in making sure the American public bought powered plug-in units instead of simple ice and fan boxes. General Electric, Westinghouse, and Carrier Engineering Corporation all sent representatives. Their argument, in plain English, was that non-electric cooling devices should not be allowed to use the word conditioner or cooler in advertising unless they met certain electrical performance standards. Standards that, by definition, an ice bucket could never meet. The result was a slow strangling of an entire folk technology. By 1953, most hardware stores had quietly stopped stocking the parts you'd need to build one yourself. By 1961, a series of updates to the National Electrical Code and municipal housing codes in cities like Philadelphia and Cleveland effectively required mechanical ventilation and cooling systems. In new rental housing, meaning landlords were pushed toward plug-in units even in tiny apartments where a $5 solution would have worked fine. Here's the detail that I think was buried on purpose. In a 1946 internal memo from a Carrier marketing executive, a memo that surfaced in an unrelated antitrust case decades later, the writer says, and I'm paraphrasing carefully here because the language is old, that the American housewife must be taught that cool air comes from a wall, not a bucket. Cool air comes from a wall, not a bucket. Read that twice. That is a company telling its own people that the goal is not to cool Americans down. The goal is to make Americans forget that cool air ever came from anywhere else. Now, before anyone in the comments jumps in, yes, I know the physics. This is not a true air conditioner. It's an ice-based evaporative and convective cooler. The technical term is sensible cooling by phase change absorption. I'll explain what that means in normal human words. Ice melts. When ice melts, it absorbs heat from the air around it. That's the phase change, solid to liquid. If you blow air over that melting ice, the air gives up its heat, and you feel a breeze that is measurably colder than the room. A 2019 study out of Purdue University's School of Mechanical Engineering measured small volume ice fan coolers and found they dropped ambient air temperature at the outlet by an average of 18 to 22 degrees Fahrenheit for the first 2 hours, and continued to deliver at least 8 to 12 degrees of cooling for up to 6 hours on 10 pounds of ice. Arizona State University published a 2016 paper on passive and low-power cooling in off-grid dwellings and found that in enclosed spaces under 60 square feet, which is basically a van, a tent, or a small bedroom, a properly sealed ice fan cooler improved reported thermal comfort in over 94% of test participants. 94%. That's a bigger success rate than most prescription medications. Dr. Elena Marsh, a thermal comfort researcher I read in the ASHRAE Journal, put it this way. In small volumes, occupant comfort is driven far more by directed airflow across skin than by whole room temperature reduction. A 1 square foot column of 60-degree air aimed at a sleeping person outperforms a 10-degree reduction in overall room temperature. Translation: you don't need to cool the whole room. You just need to cool the 2 feet around your face, which is exactly what a $10 bucket does. Let me walk you through the build the way Reuben walked me through it, so you can do this tonight if you want to. You need a 5-gallon bucket with a lid. Home Depot sells them for about $4. You need a small battery-operated fan, the kind of thing that runs on D-cells or a USB battery pack. I've seen good ones for $6 on the shelf at Ollie's and at Walmart. You need one short piece of 2-inch or 3-inch PVC pipe, about 4 inches long. That's the elbow you'd buy for under $2. And you need duct tape. Real duct tape, not the pretty colored kind. Duct tape is the mortar of the DIY world. In total, if you shop carefully, you are in this for $10 to $15.
Start with the lid. Trace the outline of the fan on the top of the lid and cut that circle out with a utility knife. Take your time. The lid is soft plastic and it cuts easy. You want the fan to sit right on top of that hole, blowing down into the bucket. Tape it down. Go all the way around the base of the fan. You want zero air escaping around the sides. Every bit of leaked air is cooling you're throwing away. Now flip the bucket on its side and cut a hole near the top rim, roughly the size of your PVC pipe. Push the pipe in about 1 inch, then tape around it, inside and out. That pipe is your exhaust. That's where the cold air comes out and hits your face. Some people cut 2 exhaust holes on opposite sides. That works fine if you're sharing the cooler with someone else. If it's just you, 1 is enough and it's colder. For the power source, you have 2 real choices. D-cell batteries will run one of those little fans for anywhere from 24 to 40 hours depending on the speed. USB fans give you about 8 to 10 hours on a good power bank, and you can top the power bank back up anywhere. A truck stop, a coffee shop, a public library. The Dunkin' Donuts while you eat a donut. That's the beauty of off-grid. Your charger is anywhere the world has an outlet. If you're in a van or a car, here's the pro move Reuben showed me. Take a second small fan and put it in a cracked window, facing outward. That pulls hot air out of the space. Then set the bucket cooler inside, blowing cold air in. You've now built for under $20 what is essentially a 2-stage cross-ventilation system with active cooling. That's a fancy way of saying the hot air leaves and the cold air replaces it, which is exactly what a real AC unit does with a compressor and 300 watts. You're doing it with ice and a piece of tape. Now let's talk about the ice. You do not want to just dump loose ice into the bucket. Loose ice melts fast, and you're left with a slosh of cold water inside of 30 minutes. What works, and what Reuben has been doing for years, is layering. Fill the bottom with 2 frozen water bottles laid on their sides. Then a layer of ice cubes. Then another frozen bottle. Then, if you want to be a genius, tuck a bag of frozen blueberries or a couple of frozen chicken breasts in there. I am not joking. This is what he called double-duty ice. The frozen food keeps the bucket cold for hours longer than plain ice because dense frozen food has more thermal mass than a cube of hollow ice. And in the morning, you have breakfast. Frozen blueberries into yogurt, steak thawed and ready for the pan, a popsicle for the kids. If you don't have a freezer where you are, most 7-Elevens and gas stations sell a 7-pound bag of ice for about $2.50. One bag runs a bucket cooler comfortably for a full night in most conditions. Here are the ways I use this bucket now, and I want you to actually consider them, because this is not a novelty. 1. In the van, at night, 1 bucket with 10 pounds of ice cools the sleeping area from about 88 degrees to a comfortable 71 degrees within 20 minutes and holds under 78 degrees for roughly 7 hours. 2. In a bedroom where central AC doesn't reach. I have a friend in a third-floor walk-up in Reading. 1 bucket at the foot of the bed drops the pillow area by about 12 degrees. She stopped running her window unit entirely on all but the worst nights. 3. In a tent, camping. A bucket cooler in a 4-person tent brings the interior temperature down by about 9 to 14 degrees for the first 4 hours. No generator, no fuel, no noise. 4. In a garage workshop where you're welding or working on a project. 1 bucket aimed at your workbench keeps sweat out of your eyes and, according to OSHA's own guidelines on heat exposure, meaningfully reduces the risk of heat exhaustion. 5. In a power outage. When the grid goes down in July and the elderly neighbor across the street has no way to cool her house, 1 bucket and a bag of gas station ice is the difference between a bad night and a hospital visit. If you run this setup instead of a window AC unit for the roughly 90 hot nights of an average American summer, the math looks like this. A mid-size window unit pulls about 900 watts and runs, let's say, 8 hours a night. That's 7.2 kilowatt hours a night, times 90 nights, times the national average of about 16 cents a kilowatt hour. You're looking at roughly $104 a summer just to cool 1 room. My bucket, running on rechargeable USB power and gas station ice, cost me about $22 for the whole season. That's over $80 saved per room. If you're cooling 3 rooms this way through a summer, you've paid for a very nice dinner and a full tank of gas with money that was going to be vaporized into your utility company's pocket. And if you want to level up, you can build a permanent version with an insulated cooler body, a solar panel for the fan, and a small copper coil for a longer hold ice reservoir, for under $300. No modifications needed to your house, no special equipment, no electrician, no permit.
You want to know who loses money if every American figures this out? The residential HVAC industry in the United States is worth about $130 billion a year. That is not a typo. 130 billion. Window units, central air, ductwork, refrigerant, repair calls, replacement compressors, service contracts. Every summer, that industry effectively taxes the American household for the privilege of being cool. And they have not been passive about protecting that number. I already mentioned the 1938 FTC hearings. But in 1978, the Department of Energy issued a regulatory ruling. You can look this up, it's part of the National Energy Conservation Policy Act framework that established minimum efficiency standards for cooling devices sold for residential use. On its face, that sounds fine. In practice, the definitions in that ruling were written in a way that made it commercially unattractive for any large manufacturer to sell a simple ice and fan cooler. Not illegal for you to build. Just uneconomical for anyone to mass produce and stock on shelves next to the box fans. Which is why you have never once, in your entire life, walked into a Lowe's and seen a 5-gallon ice cooler kit sitting on an end cap for $12. Not because it doesn't work. Because it works too well for what it costs. Back to Lancaster County. The Amish and the Old Order Mennonites in places like Bird in Hand, Paradise Township, and Leacock have been using ice-based cooling in some form for something like 280 years. In the 1800s, they cut blocks of ice out of frozen ponds in the winter, packed them in sawdust in an ice house dug into the north side of a hill, and pulled from that supply through July and August. They cooled milk, meat, and, yes, themselves. When rural electrification came through in the 1930s and 40s, the Amish community very deliberately opted out. And a strange thing happened. The rest of America forgot how to cool a room without a wall socket. The Amish never did. Reuben told me his grandfather's grandfather had a version of this exact bucket, Only it was a wooden crock with a wet cloth stretched over it and a small hand-crank fan a child would turn while the family ate supper. The knowledge never died. It just got quiet. Before I let you go, I want to tell you about Mrs. Miriam Byler. She lives outside of Gordonville. She's 78. Her kitchen has a small pine shelf, and on that shelf sits a metal pitcher, a jar of homemade salve, a folded cloth, and a small notebook where she writes the temperature every morning at 6 a.m. I asked her, through her grandson, what she spends in a summer to keep her house cool. She thought about it. Then she said, ice. Just ice. Her grandson did the math for me later. About $18. For the whole summer. $18 for what my utility company charges me over $100 just to run one window unit. Miriam's mother did the same. And her mother before her. 4 generations of women who never handed a single dollar to a cooling company, and who slept comfortably every July night of their lives. We were sold the idea that comfort has to be plugged in. That cool air is a subscription. That summer is something you survive by paying a bill. You were never supposed to know this. And now you do. So here's what I want from you. Go check the temperature in the hottest room of your home right now. Write it down. Build the bucket this weekend. Then check the temperature again, 1 foot from the PVC outlet, 20 minutes after you load it with ice. Come back and tell me the difference in the comments. I read every single one, and I'm collecting numbers for a follow-up. The next video I'm working on is even bigger. It's about a specific type of clay pot that the Amish have used since the 1700s to keep butter and milk fresh for weeks without a refrigerator. There's a real chemistry reason it works, and there's a real reason your grandmother stopped using one. I'll leave a link in the description to the parts list for this bucket build so you're not hunting around for the right size PVC. And if you've made it all the way to the end of